Well, everybody, we've come to the end of another week. I hope you are looking forward to being in God's house to worship King Jesus this Sunday. Remember, here at First Baptist, 3 services, our contemporary services at 8:30 and 11 o'clock, and our traditional service in the middle at 9:45. I hope you will be here and invite someone to come with you. This morning in our Bible reading plan for our devotion, we are in Psalm chapter 26. So Psalm 26, and what I wrote in my journal at the top of the page after reading this psalm is that I really love what David said in this psalm. I really do. It blesses me. But I also struggle with it. It may seem like a contradiction, but this psalm encourages me greatly, but it also fills me with a holy fear. You see, it's obvious in this psalm that David has a passion for God, has a passion for living a holy life, a godly life, for living with integrity, and that he wants God's help. He seeks God's help in being that kind of man. And when he writes this, he's done well and is doing well. Look at starting at verse 1, he says, "Vindicate me, O Lord, for I have walked in my integrity. I have trusted in the Lord without wavering." Verse 2, "Examine me, O Lord, and try me, test me. Test my mind and my heart. For your loving kindness is before my eyes, and I have walked in your truth." What a statement. I have walked in your truth. Then verse 4, "I do not sit with deceitful men, nor will I go with pretenders." Dropping down to verse 11, he says, "But as for me, I shall walk in my integrity. I will walk in my integrity." That's David's heart. That's David's passion. And that's how he's been living. And if you know much of his story in the Old Testament, it's obvious that when he was being chased for years by King Saul, this is before David became king, he maintained his integrity. He was this kind of man. We see here that he placed value on worshiping God with God's people. In verse 8, "O Lord, I love the habitation of your house and the place where your glory dwells." At the end of verse 12, "In the congregation I shall bless the Lord." So he wanted God. He wanted to be godly. He wanted to worship. These were all passions of his. So what is it about this chapter that I struggle with that causes me to have a holy fear? It's because you see here that the Bible is right when God said that David was a man after God's own heart. He had a heart for God. And yet years in the future, after he becomes king, we have 2 Samuel chapter 11, where David has a sexual relationship with Bathsheba. At best, an affair, at worst, sexual abuse. And he has her husband murdered. I mean, 2 terrible sins in the life of King David. And how do you reconcile those two? How do we reconcile the David of Psalm 25 and the David who took Bathsheba and had her husband murdered? How do we deal with that disconnect? Well, we can say David was a man. He was a sinful man, had a sinful nature like all of us and subject to temptation, and that is true, but is that enough, or does that just kind of gloss it over too easily? When you read the story in 2 Samuel chapter 11, David saw Bathsheba bathing, and he made the choice in that moment to keep watching, which increased his temptation. And as he watched, he then called for some advisors or someone and said, "Who is she?" He wanted more information. They told her. And then 2 Samuel says he sent his soldiers to take her. And when you really look at the story carefully, it's not like there was this invitation and there was this romantic thing that took place. He's king and she's his subject, and he sent soldiers to take her. That's abuse. It's an accumulation of actions, if you will. You see, I think David, for whatever reason in this moment, maybe there have been things leading up to it, I don't know, but in this moment, David forgot some of what he had written here in Psalm 26. David did not do, when he walked out on the balcony of the palace that night and saw Bathsheba taking a bath, he did not do what he wrote in verse 2. In verse 2 of Psalm 25, he said, "Examine me, O Lord, and try me. Test my mind and my heart." If in that moment when he saw her, he had been conscious of this and prayed that kind of prayer, God would have convicted him and he would have turned his eyes away. But he didn't do that, did he? In that moment, he did not do what he wrote in verse 4. "Do not sit with deceitful men, nor will I go with pretenders." Rather than asking godly men to come and help him in this moment of fleshly weakness, he got yes men, and they told him all about her. He did not do what he wrote in verse 6. "I shall wash my hands in innocence, and I will go about your altar, O Lord." That's prayer. He didn't turn to God in prayer. The moment he saw her and started having those sinful thoughts, he did not turn his eyes away. He did not get godly help. And he did not pray to God and say, "Oh God, forgive me, cleanse me and turn me." He didn't do that. He kept watching. And he got people who encouraged him to keep watching. Soldiers to go and take her so he could do what his flesh wanted to do, what he chose to do. See, there's lessons for us. A good beginning does not guarantee a good end. There's the lesson that integrity and godliness is a lifelong choice. That you and I must have a moment in life when we choose godliness and rightness, truth, as a lifestyle. But it's also a daily choice. Integrity and godliness are daily choices that every day I have to choose it. It's also a momentary choice that in that moment when I'm tempted, I must choose integrity. In that moment when I'm tempted, I must choose godliness. And that's why in that moment, oh God, convict me, turn my eyes away, seek Him, turn away. Seek Him, seek Him, seek Him in that moment. Don't keep feeding the temptation. You see, it's a choice to either feed the temptation or turn to God in the moment of temptation. David's sin, sexual abuse and murder, horrible sins, are such that I cannot read these beautiful psalms expressing the heart of this young man without also remembering his great sin. He really was a man after God's own heart. But there was a season in his life when he allowed his heart to go somewhere else, and he paid dearly for it. But you know what? So did Uriah. So did Bathsheba. She lost her husband because of his great sin. Man of God, woman of God, choose not just for your life and not just daily, but moment by moment to have godliness and integrity. And when you are tempted, avert your eyes from the temptation and look unto the hills from whence comes your help. Look unto the Lord in prayer and His word and purify yourself. That's the word for today. I'll see you Sunday morning in church and then Monday with another devotion. God bless you, everybody.